Today is day 1 for the Come Follow Me study for this week, June 19th to the 25th. Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 19. It is finished. Monday, June 19th, 2023, Matthew 27, 3 through 10, and 15 through 26, and Luke 23, 7 through 25. Improving our teaching. Emulate the Savior's life. It is helpful to study the ways the Savior taught, the methods he used, and the things he said. But the Savior's power to teach and lift others came from the way he lived and the kind of person he was. The more diligently you strive to live like Jesus Christ, the more you will be able to teach like him. Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 19 include descriptions of the final hours of the Savior's mortal life. Seek to feel his love for you as you study about his sacrifice and death. In every word and deed, Jesus Christ exemplified pure love, what the Apostle Paul called charity. At no time was this more evident than during the final hours of the Savior's mortal life. His dignified silence in the face of false accusations demonstrated that he is not easily provoked. His willingness to submit to scourging, mocking, and crucifixion, while restraining his power to end his torments, showed that he suffereth long and beareth all things. His compassion toward his mother and his mercy toward his crucifiers, even during his own incomparable suffering, revealed that he seeketh not his own. In his final moments on earth, Jesus was doing what he had done throughout his mortal ministry, teaching us by showing us. Indeed, charity is the pure love of Christ. Although the Savior had power to call down legions of angels, he voluntarily chose to endure unjust trials, cruel mocking, and unimaginable physical pain. Why did he do it? Because of his loving kindness, Nephi testified, and his long suffering towards the children of men. You might begin your study of the Savior's final hours by reading 1 Nephi 19:9. And the world, because of their iniquity, shall judge him to be a thing of naught. Wherefore they scourge him, and he suffereth it, and they smite him, and he suffereth it. Yea, they spit on him, and he suffereth it, because of his loving kindness and his long suffering toward the children of men. Where in Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 19 do you find examples of each thing that Nephi said Jesus would suffer? They judge him to be a thing of naught. They scourge him, they smite him, they spit upon him. Which passages help you feel the Savior's loving kindness toward you? What other thoughts and feelings do you have as you read these accounts? In Matthew 27 through 28, we read about Jesus Christ's terrible suffering and painful death for all mankind and about his resurrection. Matthew showed how these events and others leading up to it fulfilled prophecy. After experiencing ridicule, trials, and abuse at the hands of Roman soldiers, Jesus Christ was crucified. His body was placed in a tomb. At the dawning of the first day of the week, an angel of the Lord proclaimed the joyful news that Jesus had risen from the dead. Many others were also resurrected shortly thereafter, a manifestation of the truth that the Savior's resurrection made possible the resurrection of all mankind. After his resurrection, Jesus Christ met his disciples at an appointed place in Galilee and commissioned them to take his gospel to all nations. President Gordon B. Hinckley taught the resurrection of Jesus Christ was the great crowning event of his life and mission. It was the capstone of the atonement. Judas's remorse and death in Jerusalem. Matthew 27, 3 through 10. Then Judas, who had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said unto him, What is that to us? See thou to it. Thy sins be upon thee. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself on a tree. And straightway he fell down, and his bowels gushed out, and he died. And the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, It is not lawful to put them in the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Wherefore the field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value. And therefore they took the pieces of silver and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord appointed by the mouth of Jeremy. Matthew was obviously affected by the suicide of Judas, a fellow apostle, but he knew it was also a fulfillment of prophecy. Elder Bruce R. McConkie of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles wrote the following regarding the death of Judas Iscariot as the fulfillment of prophecy. However desirable the 30 pieces of silver seemed before the deed, their ill-gotten weight became a crushing burden on the soul now. In his frenzy, Judas discards them so as to fulfill in literal detail the remainder of Zechariah's messianic utterance about them. And the Lord said unto me, Cast it unto the potter, a goodly price that I was praised at for them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. The Old Testament quotation Matthew cited may be a combination of words from Zechariah 11:12-13 and words from the prophet Jeremiah. Even though Matthew cited Jeremiah was the writer, early Christian writers knew the Old Testament prophecy so well that sometimes they combined the information from various sources. Hearing before Herod, an appreciation of the sorrow of the final hours, provided as a map depicting the city of Jerusalem and the possible sites where the last days in the mortal life of Jesus Christ were spent. As you read the following narrative, picture in your mind the events that took place on that day of days and feel the sorrow of those final hours. Numbers on the map correspond to the numbers adjacent to the paragraphs. One and 2. From the upper room to Gethsemane, the disciples and Jesus walked to an orchard or garden of olive trees, where in agony the Lord suffered until he sweat great drops of blood. 3. Betrayed, arrested, bound, forsaken, and alone, in the middle of the night, Jesus was taken over the Kidron and up the steep slope to the house of Annas, to be questioned first by the former high priest and then to receive that first insulting blow upon the face. Then he was sent across the courtyard to the high priest, Joseph Caiaphas. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor. 4 and 5. Before Pilate, then before Herod, and again before Pilate, the Lord suffered the indescribable abuse and mockery of an illegal and false inquisition. Then Pilate delivered the Lord up to be crucified. 6. Forced to carry his own cross until he could do so no more, to Calvary he was taken, where the Roman soldiers pierced his hands, wrists, and feet with nails, thus affixing his body to the cross. Then came Joseph of Arimathea with fine linen, and he took Jesus' body down, wrapped it in the linen, and laid him in a sepulchre which was hewn out of a rock, and rolled a stone unto the door of the sepulchre. The mortal life and the mortal ministry of Jesus Christ were ended. Luke 23:7-12. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at the time. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he was desirous to see him for a long time, because he had heard many things of him, and he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Then he questioned with him in many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. And Herod, with his men of war, set him at naught, and mocked him, and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him again to Pilate. And the same day Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before this they were at enmity between themselves. Seeing that there was no fault in Jesus, Pilate began looking for a way to dismiss the case against him. When Pilate learned that Jesus was a Galilean, he sent him to Herod Antipas, who had political jurisdiction over Galilee, but was in Jerusalem for Passover. Herod was eager to see Jesus, hoping to witness a miracle of some sort. Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great, who had ordered the slaying of the children of Bethlehem. Herod Antipas had entered into an adulterous marriage with his brother Philip's wife. When John the Baptist had heard of this marriage, he had called it unlawful. for which Herod had put John the Baptist to death. Jesus had earlier referred to Herod as that fox, giving us further insight into Herod's deceptive character. Elder James E. Talmage of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles wrote about the exchange between the Savior and Herod. Whatever fear Herod had once felt regarding Jesus, whom he had superstitiously thought to be the reincarnation of his murdered victim, John the Baptist, was replaced by amused interest when he saw the far-famed prophet of Galilee in bonds before him, attended by a Roman guard and accompanied by ecclesiastical officers. Herod began to question the prisoner, but Jesus remained silent. The chief priests and scribes vehemently voiced their accusations, but not a word was uttered by the Lord. As far as we know, Herod is the only being who saw Christ face to face and spoke to him, yet never heard his voice. For Herod the fox, he had but disdainful and kingly silence. Thoroughly piqued, Herod turned from insulting questions to acts of malignant derision. He and his men-at-arms made sport of the suffering Christ, set him at naught and mocked him. Then in travesty they arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and set him again to Pilate. Herod had found nothing in Jesus to warrant condemnation. Elder Robert D. Hales of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles shared these thoughts on how we might follow this Savior's example when other people criticize or persecute us. When we respond to our accusers as the Savior did, we not only become more Christ-like, we invite others to feel his love and follow him as well. To respond in a Christ-like way cannot be scripted or based on a formula. The Savior responded differently in every situation. When he was confronted by wicked King Herod, he remained silent. When he stood before Pilate, he bore a simple and powerful testimony of his divinity and purpose. Facing the money changers who were defiling the temple, he exercised his divine responsibility to preserve and protect that which was sacred. Lifted up upon a cross, he uttered the incomparable Christian response, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Some people mistakenly think responses such as silence, meekness, forgiveness, and bearing humble testimony are passive and weak. But to love our enemies, bless them that curse us, do good to them that hate us, and pray for them which despitefully use us and persecute us, takes faith, strength, and most of all, Christian courage. Elder David A. Bednar of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles taught, "Consider also how the Master was accused and condemned before Pilate to be crucified. The Savior's meekness is evidenced in his disciplined response, strong restraint, and unwillingness to exert his infinite power for personal benefit." Second hearing before Pilate in Jerusalem. Luke 23:13-15. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said unto them, Ye have brought this man before me as one who perverteth the people. And behold, I having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof ye accuse him. No, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. Only Luke described Jesus' appearance before Herod Antipas and Pilate's subsequent attempt to declare Jesus' innocence by referring to Herod as a second witness. I have found no fault in this man, no, nor yet Herod, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. Luke's account gives us the clearest understanding that Jesus appeared before Pilate twice, before and after he was sent to Herod. Luke also recorded that Pilate asked the Jews in attendance 3 times why they wanted Jesus crucified, and then finally giving in to popular pressure, released Barabbas. Luke 23:16-17. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for of necessity he must release one unto them at the feast. A murderer released. Matthew 27:15-21. Now at that feast the governor was wont or accustomed to release unto the people a prisoner whom they would. And they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas, or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. When he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor said unto them, Whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. The name Barabbas ironically means son of the Father. The crowd, most of whom were stirred up by the chief priests and elders, called for the release of Barabbas, while rejecting the true Son of the Father. In one sense, we are all like Barabbas. We are the sinful sons set free because the true Son of the Father was condemned to death. According to the Greek text of Matthew 27:26, Barabbas's first name was Jesus. Jesus Barabbas was a thief, murderer, and traitor, while Jesus the Christ was perfect. Those who condemned the Savior to death were presented with a clear choice, and they chose evil. The law of Moses provided a foreshadowing of Barabbas's release centuries before it happened. The law of Moses taught that once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest selected 2 goats. One goat became the scapegoat and was released alive into the wilderness, while the other was for the Lord, and was killed as an offering for the sins of the people. The high priest then took blood from the slain goat into the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle. He sprinkled it on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, called the mercy seat, symbolically making atonement for the sins of Israel. Gerald N. Lund, who later became a member of the 70, explained how the events of the Day of Atonement foreshadowed the Savior's offering of his blood. Christ, as the Lamb of Jehovah, as well as high priest, shed his own blood to enter the heavenly Holy of Holies, where that blood ransomed from their sins those who would believe in him and obey his commandments. Mark 15:6-15. Now it was common at that feast for Pilate to release unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. And there was one man named Barabbas bound with them, who had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude, crying aloud, began to desire him to deliver Jesus unto them. But Pilate answered unto them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy, but the chief priests moved the people, that he should rather release Barabbas unto them, as he had before done unto them. And Pilate spake again and said unto them, What will ye then that I shall do with him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Deliver him unto us to be crucified. Away with him, crucify him. Then Pilate said unto them, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him. And so Pilate, willing to content the people, released Barabbas unto them, and delivered Jesus, when he had been scourged, to be crucified. Luke 23:18-21. And they cried out all at once, saying, Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas, who for a certain sedition made in the city and for murder was cast into prison. Pilate therefore, willing to release Jesus, spake again to them, but they cried, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Luke 23:22-25. And he said unto them the third time, Why, what evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him, and let him go. And they were instant in loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified, and the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. And he released unto them him who for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they had desired, and delivered Jesus to their will. Second hearing before Pilate continued. Matthew 27:22-23. Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do with Jesus, which is called Christ? And all said unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. Blood guiltiness. Matthew 27:24. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but rather that a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See that ye do nothing unto him. What did Pilate mean when he washed his hands before the Jews? Elder Bruce L. McConkie said, at this point, or perhaps earlier, as the inspired version account indicates, Pilate, following the Jewish practice in such cases, performed the ritualistic ceremony designed to free him from responsibility for Jesus' death. Pilate recognized that Jesus was innocent of the accusations made against him. Even his wife had warned him of Jesus Christ's innocence. One provision of the Mosaic Law stated that if a person was found to have been killed, the elders of the city could wash their hands to signify that they were not responsible. There are also examples in Greek and Roman literature for washing oneself as a symbolic gesture of absolving oneself of responsibility for shedding another's blood. Thus, when Pilate washed his hands, he may have been claiming innocence in a way the Jewish leaders would have understood. Washing his hands, however, did not allow Pilate to evade responsibility. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles noted that Pilate's freshly washed hands could not have been more stained or more unclean. Why did Pilate give in to the demands of the Jews to execute Jesus? Elder James E. Talmage said, in utter disregard of the Hebrew antipathy against images and heathen insignia, Pilate had the legionaries enter Jerusalem at night, carrying their eagles and standards decorated with the effigy of the emperor. To the Jews, this act was a defilement of the holy city. In vast multitudes, they gathered at Caesarea and petitioned the procurator that the standards and other images be removed from Jerusalem. For 5 days, the people demanded, and Pilate refused. He threatened a general slaughter and was amazed to see the people offer themselves as victims of the sword rather than relinquish their demands. Pilate had to yield. Again, he gave offense in forcibly appropriating the Corban, or sacred funds of the temple, to the construction of an aqueduct for supplying Jerusalem with water from the pools of Solomon. Anticipating the public protest of the people, he had caused Roman soldiers to disguise themselves as Jews, and with weapons concealed to mingle with the crowds. At a given signal, these assassins plied their weapons, and great numbers of defenseless Jews were killed or wounded. On another occasion, Pilate had grossly offended the people by setting up in his official residence at Jerusalem shields that had been dedicated to Tiberius, and this less for the honor of Tiberius than for annoyance of the Jewish people. A petition signed by the ecclesiastical officers of the nation and by others of influence, including 4 Herodian princes, was sent to the emperor, who reprimanded Pilate and directed that the shields be removed from Jerusalem to Caesarea. These outrages of national feeling and many minor acts of violence, extortion, and cruelty that the Jews held against the procurator. He realized that his tenure was insecure, and he dreaded exposure. Such wrongs had he wrought that when he would have done good, he was deterred through cowardly fear of the accusing past. Matthew 27:25 then answered all the people and said, His blood come upon us and our children. Over the past 2,000 years, people have sometimes used this statement, His blood be on us and on our children, to blame all the Jews of Jesus' time, or even Jews of later generations, for the death of Jesus Christ. Such accusations ignore scriptural accounts stating that a great many Jews of Jesus' time believed in him and that his crucifixion was brought about by Roman authorities in cooperation with a relatively small group of Jewish leaders. Any anti-Semitism based on Matthew 27:25 also ignores scriptural testimony that the Lord loves the people of Israel and has a plan for their salvation. Mormon, the Nephite prophet historian, wrote, Yea, and ye need not any longer hiss nor spurn, nor make game of the Jews, nor any of the remnant of the house of Israel. For behold, the Lord remembereth his covenant unto them, and he will do unto them according to that which he has sworn.
Art thou the King of the Jews?
Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me?
Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done?
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my people fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews.
Art thou a king then?
Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice.
What is truth? Ye have brought this man unto me as one that perverteth the people. I have examined him before you, and find no fault with this man touching those things whereof you accuse him. I have sent him to Herod. He has found that nothing worthy of death has been done. I will therefore chastise him and release him. According to your custom, at this time of year, one prisoner shall be released.
Barabbas. Free Barabbas.
What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Christ?
Crucify him.
I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it.
The following identifies one of the prophecies fulfilled by events of the trial and death of Jesus Christ. Prophecy, Isaiah 53:5. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. 1 Nephi 19:9. Wherefore they scourge him, and he suffereth it. Fulfillment, Matthew 27:26. Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Generally, a scourging consisted of being beaten with a whip 39 times. Elder Bruce R. McConkie explained what it meant to be scourged. This brutal practice, a preliminary to crucifixion, consisted of stripping the victim of clothes, strapping him to a pillar or frame, and beating him with a scourge made of leather straps weighted with sharp pieces of lead and bone. It left the tortured sufferer bleeding, weak, and sometimes dead. The torture and mistreatment the Savior received at the hands of the Romans were part of the atonement, along with his suffering in Gethsemane and his death on the cross. As Isaiah testified, he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Why did Pilate deliver Jesus to be crucified, even though he knew Jesus was innocent? What lessons do we learn from Pilate's experience about standing up for what we know is right? It might be helpful for your family to role-play scenarios that allow them to practice standing up for what is right.